Sorry to borrow what I'm sure will become yet another classic Carlos Sainz team radio moment, but oh no! Kia ora, I'm Kimmy, I talk F1 in the world's second worst accent. These are my 3 conclusions for the 2025 Qatar Grand Prix, and yeah, look, I'm going to get into the whole McLaren of it all soon, even though I'm sure you're all sick to death of hearing about them, but first a little bit of a serious moment. And this will be one of those episodes where I won't be censoring myself. Do those of you who were bullying and also apparently sending death threats to Kimi Antonelli feel good about yourselves? Like overall, as human beings, do you just feel like really nice inside? As a person, does harassing a 19-year-old over sports make you feel powerful, validated, maybe even righteous? Because if it does, that's just really fucking sad, man. I mean, bullying anyone online behind the pseudo-anonymous facade of a social media account is just a weird thing to do anyway. Despite its prevalence, it is categorically and unequivocally a fucking weird thing to do. But to do it to a young adult who did absolutely nothing wrong other than make a mistake is next level bullshittery. And there's a few conclusions that I take from this, and none of them are new. Tribalism in sports has always been an issue, yes, but social media and the normalization of this kind of toxic behavior has exacerbated things exponentially. Gone are the days where we'd all hang out on forums that were moderated and had individual community standards. If you didn't like the expectation to interact with civility, then you could fuck off somewhere else. We couldn't at people to get into their notifications with something vile. Things that were said beyond 1 or 2 introductory threads were often behind sign-in pages that required approved membership where you were on probation for your first 5 to 10 posts. Mods could ban you whenever the fuck they felt like it for whatever reason. And yep, some of these communities were cesspits of negativity and various isms and phobias. And to be clear, this is not exclusively a sports thing, not by a long shot. But the difference is they were siloed, and unless someone who was the subject of the conversation was feeling particularly masochistic, they wouldn't ever see any of it. That doesn't make it okay, but it was still a very different environment. Now it's a free-for-all where the onus is on the user being harassed to block people or rise above it. People can just go out there and create a new account anyway, and when it all becomes too much, the only option is to remove themselves from social media entirely, which for sports people and celebrities in general can be a challenging thing to do, particularly because their personal brand is something that matters a lot to their job, and it's often not just them involved in the decision. There's contracts to be considered, influence from employers and management teams, which often is even more intense for sports people, with sponsorships and contractual media obligations to think about. And before anyone gets down in the comments and starts going, boo-hoo, oh dear, how sad, rich, famous and privileged, needs to harden up, sticks and stones, blah blah, woof woof. These are people. Human people who have worked their entire lives to achieve a goal, yes, even Lance Stroll, and the moment they get there, they're just supposed to accept that dickbags on the internet will be tweeting fucking death threats at them? No, fuck off. If you think this, you are actively enabling the problem and are part of it. And I've brought up FOM and Liberty Media's responsibility before with regards to exactly what team radio they choose to broadcast on the official feed. There is definitely a bit more consideration that needs to happen there. And while look, to be honest, I actually do feel kind of bad for GP that a moment of snark was chosen to be played to millions of people and was then apparently run with by a bunch of them as an excuse to go online and throw vitriol at a teenager. That's pretty messed up. And he kind of got thrown under the bus there a bit. It's a high-intensity sport where sometimes you say shit on the radio and don't think about the 14 different ways someone could use it against yourself or others. But Red Bull's apology, particularly considering Helmut Marko opened his big gob as well, was pretty pathetic. And in the broadcast centre's defence, they actually did show what happened to Antonelli in between the immediate post-race interviews and the cool-down room. It's just apparently everyone was too busy online posting shitty tweets to pay any attention. Anyone watching the whole broadcast, in theory, should have seen the replay of that moment and realised it was a genuine mistake and a moment of oversteer. F1 TV then repeated it in the post-race show, replay, brief analysis from Jolyon Palmer, and all very clearly concerned about how any insinuation it was a deliberate move might be construed by shitty fans. I would say they've probably already seen these shitty fans' tweets. The fact that everyone even needs to consider this is an indictment on the state of our society. So the overarching conclusion? If this kind of behaviour continues, which it will, make no mistake, people will continue to be assholes no matter what the FIA tries to do about it, and yeah, maybe that's being a little bit nihilistic, but whatever, we can expect even more carefully curated media personas and fewer moments of authenticity in a sport where the unfiltered adrenaline-fueled sound bites and reactions are a big part of the spectacle and what keeps many fans connected with the people behind the visor. And that sucks. Okay, moving on to something nice this time, and Williams, who drove out of the garage in Bahrain back in February with the same two tubs that came 9th in the Constructors' Championship last season with 17 points, and somehow managed to develop and tweak it into a car that just secured 5th for 2025 and already has 8 times the points of last year with 1 race to go. Meanwhile, Ferrari basically chucked the SF24 in the bin, a car that would have won the Constructors last year if it hadn't been for that classic mid-season disaster of an update that completely screwed everything up. You know, that one that took the drivers a solid couple of months to convince the design and engineering team that it was just bad and needed to go in the skip, and then once they were listened to, they were back to winning again. That car? The contrast between these two historic Formula One teams feels starker than ever. And no, this isn't going to be me glazing Carlos Sainz and going on and on about the Sainz effect, although you have to admit, statistically, he comes out looking pretty alright every time he switches teams, and considering he's been with literally 50% of the grid at this point, well, you get my point. But no, it's not about Sainz, or not directly at least. It's about environment and how the dichotomy between Ferrari and Williams can only really be interpreted as one team with immense arrogance around how it goes about the business of racing, reportedly refusing to take on feedback from a driver who spent 13 years in a team that won the Constructors' Championship 8 times in a row, and another team that has more of a focus on humility and collaboration and is, dare I say, happy to have its flaws pointed out so it can take action. And I low-key cannot believe that the one owned by a private equity firm is the latter. And now it's pretty much a done deal that these two teams are going to be parked up next to each other in the paddock next year, whereas this season they were at opposite ends, bar one team on either side. Now there have been various moments this year where Carlos Sainz has said the atmosphere in Ferrari was a certain way without outright saying it, focusing on how he talks about his time with Williams, how he works with the team, how he feels within the team environment, and how they respond to adversity. Yeah, it's a little bit of reading between the lines and understanding memes, but when you add in Lewis Hamilton's despondence, the reports he's provided various recommendations for improving communication and processes, and so far appears to have been completely ignored, you can't help but get the vibe that Ferrari and Williams are not so much apples and oranges as they are apples and an unexpected pickle in a peanut butter sandwich. And while I feel pretty bad for Alex Albon after going through the ringer with Williams and pretty much carrying the team on his back for 4.5 seasons, seeing Sainz as the one up on the podium twice this year feels incredibly cathartic when you consider how he came to be there in the first place. So what's the conclusion here? I truly believe that we are watching the start of the Williams renaissance. And yeah, I'm biased. I have a soft spot for the team and both of its drivers, but the fact that they went from scoring 17 total points last season to sitting on 137 with 1 race still to go, 2 podiums, 5 P5s, with a group of people who are all singing from the same songbook, that's a recipe for success. And okay, here we go, the big one. Finally, it is time to talk about McLaren, and I'm just going to come out and say it. If McLaren loses the driver's title next weekend to Max Verstappen, it will go down in history as possibly the biggest fumble ever by a Formula One team. Now, I've seen a lot of people quoting Zach Brown's comment from the Beyond the Grid podcast a couple of weeks ago about rather being beaten by Max than beaten by themselves, which kind of feels unintentionally prophetic considering the last 2 weekends. Make no mistake, if neither Lando Norris nor Oscar Piastri win this thing, it is absolutely McLaren who did this to themselves. And you can split hairs over individual race weekends, minor points losses here, Lando's DNF in Canada, Oscar's disaster weekend in Baku, But the crux of the matter is that when they had the chance to seal the deal early, McLaren stuffed it up. First by getting the setup wrong in Vegas, a bumpy, high-speed street circuit, when they'd already been marginal on plank wear 2 weeks before in Brazil, then by making the strategy cock-up to end all strategy cock-ups this weekend in Qatar. And yeah, sure, I get the reasoning behind why they left both cars out in theory. It was the worst possible time for a safety car, as it removed pretty much all strategic variations beyond someone having a Hail Mary crack at a 3-stop, and it might have worked out for them if literally everyone else hadn't come in and Max had found himself buried in the pack somewhere, unable to make progress. But the fact is that every team converged on the same answer when posed with the question, should we pit on lap 7 when it locks us into 2 25-lap stints? It makes you wonder why McLaren didn't automatically come to the same conclusion and go for it, you know, considering it was so clearly and emphatically the correct one. Even though McLaren insists that this was a purely strategic decision and it could have been the right one had there been another safety car, and when was the last time you heard a team talking so much about the possibility of a safety car unless it was to justify staying out until the second to last lap in a last-ditch attempt to salvage something? You can't help but wonder if there was an element of this oft talked about fairness involved. Whether that be about offering both drivers the same opportunity or being seen to offer both drivers the same opportunity. Talking so much about fairness and equity in the decision has very much put McLaren in a position where they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. If they split the strategies and put one of them on the optimal one, then they're not offering the same opportunity to both drivers, which in this scenario would have been only made worse by the fact that in this case the driver who had performed the best over the course of the weekend, the leader of the race, started on pole but wasn't currently the leader of the championship, would likely have been the one to draw the short straw. If they put them both on the same strategy, and that strategy is so clearly and obviously the wrong one, then you end up with people like me talking about it critically and at length on the internet. Yes, I am aware I am in a glass house throwing stones here. So the question is, had McLaren kept their concept of fairness to themselves, would this have happened? Conclusion? I think probably not. I think Lando Norris would have come in behind Max Verstappen to try and beat him on pure pace. Oscar would have then been left out, and in retrospect, probably still come third, and we would all be talking about how McLaren made the smart choice to cover all of their bases and protect the guy who had a pretty big chance of clinching the championship when the checkered flag came down. But then I guess if they'd done that, then there'd be a big chunk of Oscar Piastri fans who'd all lose their heads and initiate a new flurry of death threats towards Lando Norris. So, 2 #1 drivers. How's that working out for you, Zach? Pretty well? Oh, you won the Constructors' Championship? Oh, that's right. Nobody's bigger than McLaren, especially not the people who bring in a big chunk of your merchandise sales. Maybe we should ask how this is working out for them. So that's it. That's my 3 conclusions from this weekend's 2025 Qatar Grand Prix. What are yours? Maybe this weekend helped you form an opinion on the compulsory 2 stops. Maybe you think the FIA will take a good, long, hard look at Fernando Alonso leading a DRS train that contained 2/3 of the grid and decide this track is not fit for purpose. Heck, maybe you've already moved on and are fully just waiting for Red Bull to finally make their driver lineup announcement later on today, so we can get Yuki and Liam's misery over and done with for once and for all. Chat about it down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, and if you're not already subscribed, then please consider subscribing to the channel. It's free and it helps me out a heck of a lot. I put out videos most Tuesdays and Thursdays, and this year I will be doing my absolute best to try and keep this up over the winter, or in my case, summer break. A huge thanks to my patrons for their continued support. If you'd like to become one, then the link is down in the description as well as right here on screen. Stay chill. Please don't send death threats and hate to people online. I'll catch you next week. Ka kite.